Today, we are focusing on one of the most compelling and, frankly, paradoxical political transformations of the modern era.
We're talking about Volodymyr Zelenskyy.
It truly is a study in contrasts. You have a political figure who began his career by founding a literal entertainment empire, a comedy factory, as our sources describe it,
Yeah.
and then was thrust onto the global stage as a wartime leader, drawing comparisons to historical figures like Winston Churchill. I mean, the scope of his challenge, navigating war, technology, and this incredibly volatile, high-stakes diplomacy is just immense.
And that dramatic shift, that transformation from entertainer to commander-in-chief is the very core of our deep dive today.
Exactly.
Our sources track his unlikely trajectory, beginning with his entry into politics in 2019. And it's important to remember, this was 5 years after the initial Russo-Ukrainian war began in the Donbass.
That's a key point. He didn't come into a country of peace.
Not at all. We're examining his pre-war attempts at aggressive domestic reform, his strategic, very tech-forward response to the 2022 full-scale invasion, and the complex, high-stakes decisions shaping Ukraine's military and political future, including developments well into 2025.
Our mission today is really to move beyond the visual brand, the iconic olive green clothing, and focus on the substance and the strategy.
Right.
We need to dissect the foundations of his popularity, the domestic challenges he faced even before the full-scale invasion, and critically analyze how his command structure has evolved.
Especially with technology.
Especially with technology for asymmetric warfare, managing the information front, and navigating these incredibly volatile relationships with global powers like the U.S., China, and India. And the paradox of fighting for democracy while centralizing power under martial law is something we have to explore in detail.
Okay, let's unpack this journey, because it begins not in a government building, but on a stage.
Very much so.
Zelenskyy was born in 1978 in Kyiv and came from a Jewish family with roots that directly inform his later clashes with Russian rhetoric.
And this is so important. His grandfather, Semyon Zelenskyy, served as an infantry colonel in the Red Army during World War II, and other family members were tragically killed in the Holocaust.
So when Russia comes in with this absurd rhetoric of denazification...
It's not just absurd, it's a cynical personal insult. That family history provides critical historical context. But professionally, his initial path was purely creative and commercial.
He has a law degree, right, from the Kyiv Institute of Economics.
He does. But he chose not to practice. His real domain was comedy, which, in the post-Soviet space, often served as a kind of proving ground for politics.
And his entry point was KVN, the Club of the Funny and Resourceful. For anyone who doesn't know, this was a hugely popular, almost like a comedy league, that operated across the former Soviet bloc.
It was massive. He joined his local team at 17. By 1997, he helps form his own team, Kvartal 95, and they were successful enough to win the KVN Major League. This competitive, high-visibility platform was, for a lot of people, the first step into public life.
And it sounds like a very intense start.
It was almost nomadic. The Kvartal 95 team members spent a huge amount of time living and working in Moscow, constantly touring across the former Soviet countries, often, struggling financially to make ends meet.
So there's a significant Russian language engagement there, exposure to the Russian entertainment market.
Absolutely, which really complicates the later nationalistic shift in his career.
So what led to the split from the KVN system? Because breaking away is what allowed them to build their own independent machine.
Well, the break, which happened around 2003, was complex. It was fueled primarily by prolonged tension over money, specifically, who controlled the revenue, and, very significantly, political censorship. KVN, despite its comedic front, was essentially a state-sanctioned entertainment vehicle. And when Kvartal 95 pushed the boundaries, they hit a wall. One specific incident our sources cite involved a highly objectionable anti-Semitic insult from a Russian KVN producer. That, combined with all the other pressures, prompted Zelenskyy and his team to just leave and establish full independence.
And this is where the business acumen really shines through. He turns Kvartal 95 into a true powerhouse.
It's incredible. They founded Kvartal 95 Studio in 2003, and our sources explicitly call it an empire and a comedy factory.
Their flagship program, Evening for Tall, it wasn't just popular, it was dominant. By 2019, something like 85% of Ukrainians reported having watched the show.
That is the definition of market saturation. They were producing not just live comedy, but films, cartoons, TV shows. And their approach to intellectual property, it showed an eye toward modern global markets.
You're talking about make the comedian laugh.
Exactly. That format, where contestants try to make the two judges laugh, it It was a huge international success. It was licensed and sold to 21 countries.
Including some major
Oh,
territories.
yeah, China, Italy, Finland. This gave Zelenskyy international name recognition and, crucially, experience in structuring complex commercial deals long before he ever thought about running for president.
Then we see the first strategic pivot. Or maybe it's the inevitable convergence of art and politics starting in 2014 when the initial conflict in Donbass began.
That pivot was crucial. Kvartal 95 started performing for Ukrainian soldiers directly in the war zone, and they made significant financial contributions, including donating 1 million hryvnia to the army.
And this is important because up to this point, he had worked mostly in Russian language productions, right?
Almost entirely. He had only one Ukrainian language role, me, you, he, she, in 2018. And even that was translated from Ukrainian into Russian and then dubbed back into Ukrainian for a Lithuanian actress.
So these actions in 2014, they established his patriotic and financial commitment to the Ukrainian state at war.
It was a clear signal. The entertainer was also a patriot, years before his political ambitions became explicit.
And all of that led to the creation of the character that served as his ultimate political launchpad, Vesel Hulabratko.
The fictional president he played in the TV series Servant of the People from 2015 to 2019.
For our listeners, the show is about a history teacher who just goes on this epic rant against corruption. It goes viral, and suddenly he's elected president.
It's the perfect manufactured identity.
Yep.
The show not only made him a household name, but specifically associated him with the core grievances of the Ukrainian public, corruption and the stagnant political establishment. He was literally practicing for the job in the public eye.
So when he finally launches his real political career, the announcement itself was pure show business drama.
Oh, completely. He announced his candidacy on New Year's Eve 2018, completely upstaging the incumbent president Petro Poroshenko's traditional holiday address on the 1+1 channel.
He said it was a technical glitch, but
The symbolic impact of interrupting the old guard's message with the new challengers was just undeniable.
the campaign that followed was a strategic masterclass in leveraging the digital age.
Absolutely. He ran under the party name Servant of the People, using the goodwill of his TV brand. His platform was fundamentally anti-establishment, anti-corruption. And crucially, his style was almost entirely virtual.
So minimal mainstream media engagement.
Minimal. It was all high-impact social media posts, YouTube videos, and comedy routines instead of the traditional expensive political rallies.
And the mainstream media outlets were not happy about this.
They were deeply suspicious. They explicitly criticized him, demanding he stop avoiding journalists just days before the election.
But his counter-argument was pretty sharp.
It was highly effective. He said he was avoiding talk shows because they were just platforms where people of the old power were just doing PR. By refusing to engage, he reinforced his image as the outsider who was above the messy political fray.
This is what scholars later called valence populism.
Exactly. It's a strategy that focuses heavily on these non-positional, universally agreeable concepts like integrity and anti-corruption, and it lets you sidestep the need for detailed, controversial policy positions.
Well, regardless of the political analysis, the result was historic. He won in a massive landslide victory in the second round.
He took 73.23% of the vote. That stands as the biggest landslide in the history of Ukrainian presidential elections. The political outsider, the comedian, was now legitimately the president.
So Zelenskyy takes office in May 2019, inheriting a country already struggling with 5 years of conflict in the East and, deep structural corruption nationwide.
Right.
What's remarkable about his initial tenure is the sheer speed and the aggressive nature of his legislative agenda. He seemed determined to show he was serious about reform.
That aggressive start was absolutely essential for maintaining the momentum of his populist wave. He didn't hesitate at all. On the day of his inauguration, he dramatically dissolved the parliament, forcing snap elections that allowed his new Servant of the People party to gain a majority.
And then one of his first big promises fulfilled was stripping lawmakers of legal immunity.
That was in September 2019.
So why was stripping legal immunity so significant? For an audience member who might not follow Ukrainian politics day to day, what did that actually change?
Well, historically, legal immunity allowed members of parliament to avoid prosecution for corruption or criminal activity while in office. It was a mechanism that protected the old, entrenched political establishment from any kind of accountability.
So it was a shield for the elite.
A huge one. By removing it, Zelenskyy signaled he was ready to dismantle the protective shell that had long shielded them. It was a massive win against the status quo.
He also tackled foundational issues like electoral law, reforming Ukraine's referendum laws in January 2021. But his biggest and I'd imagine most politically dangerous target was always the oligarchs.
Yes, the anti-oligarch law, passed in September 2021, was a frontal assault on this structure. It mandated the creation of a public registry of individuals designated as oligarchs based on criteria like net worth, media ownership, and political influence.
And getting on that registry had real consequences.
Very real consequences. These individuals were banned from participating in the privatization of state-owned companies and were prohibited from contributing financially to politicians or political parties.
That sounds like a necessary, dramatic move to clean up the system. But our sources also highlight significant critique against this very law. What was the central counter-argument?
The core criticism was that while the objective of reducing oligarchic influence was good, the specific mechanism of the law risked concentrating too much power in the presidency itself.
How so?
Well, critics argued that the power to designate who was an oligarch, and therefore who lost political and economic rights, essentially gave Zelensky's administration a potent weapon to silence or neutralize rivals. The fear was it could replace the influence of private oligarchs with the influence of a centralized, powerful state presidency.
Swapping one form of centralized power for another.
That was the fear.
And that criticism gained alarming traction just a month later with the global release of the Pandora Papers in October 2021. This was a massive leak of financial data, and Zelensky's name was right in the middle of it.
Precisely. The papers revealed that Zelensky, his chief aide, Serhiy Shafir, and Ivan Bakanov, the head of the Security Service of Ukraine, operated this extensive network of offshore companies.
Registered in tax havens like the British Virgin Islands, Cyprus, Belize?
Yes, and the network included documented ownership of expensive properties in London.
So, the anti-corruption reformer, the man who rose to power railing against the opaque dealings of the elite, was revealed to be using those very offshore financial structures. How did he defend himself?
The initial political reaction was, explosive given his platform. Zelensky offered a robust defense. He asserted that these companies weren't set up for illicit enrichment, but were necessary to protect Kvartal 95 Studios' assets from political pressure during the highly contentious and corrupt administration of Viktor Yanukovych, which preceded him.
So he was saying it was a defensive move.
He maintained that using such offshore entities was, sadly, common practice in the media and creative industry at the time to shield assets from politically motivated seizures or raids.
And was that defense legally sound?
It was eventually affirmed by a domestic body. The National Agency on Corruption Prevention, or NAACP, later investigated and concluded they found no definitive signs of illicit enrichment on his part. But the political damage was done.
Of course.
Created this constant tension. The man fighting corruption was also a product of the very system he was trying to dismantle.
And even amidst these domestic battles, the primary campaign promise ending the conflict in Donbass remained the most urgent foreign policy objective.
It was a political tightrope walk with extraordinarily high stakes. His goal was simple: negotiate with Russia to end the conflict. But critically, he refused to negotiate directly with the leaders of the so-called DPR and LPR republics.
Because he saw them as Russian puppets.
Exactly. He argued correctly, according to our sources, that they were merely Russian puppets, and negotiating with them would just legitimize Moscow's aggression.
That led to the preliminary deal announced in October 2019. What were the specific terms, and why did they provoke such a strong domestic reaction?
The agreement involved Ukraine agreeing to respect local elections to be held in the occupied territories in exchange for a guaranteed Russian withdrawal of forces. The reaction inside Ukraine was instantaneous and overwhelmingly negative.
Right. Massive public criticism, large-scale protests in Kyiv.
Yes.
What were the protesters' core fears?
The fear was twofold and, frankly, very rational. First, that the elections would not be free or fair, since hundreds of thousands of pro-Ukrainian residents had been driven out since 2014. That would guarantee a Moscow-favorable outcome.
And second,
A profound lack of trust that Russia would actually uphold its end of the deal and genuinely withdraw. So Ukraine would have sacrificed political legitimacy for a promise that might never materialize. The deal ultimately failed, but it did lead to the first face-to-face meeting between Zelensky and Putin, showing that diplomatic engagement was at least attempted.
as 2021 drew to a close, the sources indicate a clear escalation in his diplomatic rhetoric regarding NATO.
Yes. By April 2021, in response to the growing Russian military buildup, Zelensky began urging NATO members to dramatically speed up Ukraine's request for membership and provide concrete security guarantees. He saw NATO integration as the only real long-term shield against Russian aggression.
Yet almost at the same time, there was this notable public disagreement with Western intelligence in the immediate run-up to the full-scale invasion.
This is a fascinating nuance. As late as January 2022, while the US and UK were sounding loud alarms about an imminent invasion, Zelensky publicly called on the West not to create what he termed panic,
Why?
because he was worried it could risk destroying the Ukrainian economy. He stated that, from his perspective, they did not see a bigger escalation than what had been happening for years. He was walking this impossible line, seeking military support without triggering the panic and capital flight that would economically destabilize the nation before a single shot was even fired. It definitely strained relations in those final weeks.
And then, on February 24th, 2022, the calculus changed entirely. Russia launched its full-scale invasion. This single moment redefined not just the nation, but the leader himself.
The transition from a politically complicated domestic reformer to a unifying wartime figure was instantaneous and decisive. He immediately declared martial law and initiated general mobilization. But the truly defining political moment, the one that launched his global image, was his refusal to flee Kyiv.
Let's dwell on that moment. U.S. and Turkish officials offered to evacuate him as Russian forces closed in on the capital.
And his response was incredibly concise and just utterly potent. The fight is here. I need ammunition, not a ride.
That one line.
That simple statement became a global meme, a political rallying cry, and a psychological weapon. It just shattered the Russian narrative that the Ukrainian leadership would immediately collapse or flee. By choosing to stay, often filmed walking the streets of Kyiv with his team, dressed in simple olive green, he psychologically cemented his position as the leader standing shoulder to shoulder with his people.
That stand then propelled his success on what has become a defining theater of this conflict, the information front.
Absolutely. The Harvard Political Review correctly analyzed him as history's first truly online wartime leader. He completely bypassed traditional diplomatic and media gatekeepers.
He used social media, particularly Instagram, where he already had this massive following, to deliver daily video addresses.
And those reached both the Ukrainian population and the international community directly, completely unfiltered.
This communication strategy was so sophisticated. It wasn't just for morale. It was a continuous diplomatic lobbying campaign. He delivered these impassioned, highly tailored addresses to legislatures around the world.
The UK Parliament, the US Congress, the Canadian Parliament, the German Bundestag, the Israeli Knesset, the European Union.
And these tailored appeals were just masters of rhetorical diplomacy.
They were. He would use specific cultural or historical references relevant to each audience, mentioning Pearl Harbor and 9/11 in the US Congress, or invoking the horrors of the Holocaust in Israel. This relentless communication blitz successfully rallied global support and prevented Ukraine fatigue in those critical early months.
And the results were quantifiable. His confidence rating soared, exceeding 90% domestically. Internationally, Pew Research indicated 72% confidence in him among Americans. He was inevitably named Time Person of the Year for 2022.
Of course, that global profile also made him Russia's #1 target.
Right.
Our sources confirm he was identified immediately as Russia's primary assassination target, reportedly surviving more than a dozen attempts. What's chilling is the detail that at least 3 attempts were prevented, thanks to tips from employees within the Russian FSB, the Federal Security Service, who were actively opposing the war.
That just underscores the profound existential risk he accepted by staying in Kyiv.
It does.
But the information battlefield is high-tech, and the war quickly demonstrated the dark side of digital conflict, specifically through deepfakes.
This was a landmark event in global information warfare. On March 16, 2022, we saw what has been cited as the world's first major global-scale deepfake disinformation attack targeting a head of state during conflict.
It was a fabricated video of him, right?
Yes, circulated online, showing Zelensky appearing physically distressed and calling on all Ukrainian citizens and soldiers to surrender to Russia.
How effective was it, given the sophistication of the technology?
Tactically, it was largely a failure. The deepfake was quickly identified and countered. The technology at the time still had some minor visual flaws, and official channels immediately debunked it. However, strategically, it signaled a new era.
It showed that synthetic media was now a weapon.
A weaponized tool in international conflict, forcing governments worldwide to grapple with the threat of manufactured reality.
And this brings us directly to the strategic technology focus of his leadership, which is central to our sources. We see a strong emphasis on leveraging technology to combat a larger, more conventionally armed adversary.
Yes, the special report source highlights that Zelensky is actively pushing new drone technology to stop Russia's aggression.
And this is maybe the most strategically significant shift under his command.
It reflects a doctrine of asymmetric warfare. Ukraine cannot hope to match Russia in sheer volume of traditional military material tanks, artillery, jets. So the strategy pivoted toward using advanced, networked, and rapidly produced uncrewed aerial systems, or drones, to level the playing field.
So what does that strategic focus entail in practical terms? It sounds like more than just buying off-the-shelf drones.
Oh, it's a national effort toward rapid domestic innovation and production. The administration, particularly through figures like the Minister of Digital Transformation, actively streamlined the regulatory process, provided incentives for Ukrainian tech startups, and rapidly adopted feedback loops from the front lines.
So it's about speed and adaptation.
It's about mass-producing cheap, sophisticated reconnaissance and attack drones that can overwhelm Russia's defenses and provide critical, real-time intelligence advantages. This technological edge is seen as absolutely critical to maintaining the fight.
While technology is multiplying resources externally, domestically, the wartime command structure resulted in a significant, and some would say necessary, consolidation of power and control over the flow of information.
That is the critical tension indeed. In March 2022, under the powers granted by martial law, Zelensky issued a decree consolidating all national Ukrainian TV news stations, regardless of ownership, into a single 24-hour state-run news broadcast, United News.
And at the same time, he suspended the activities of 11 political parties with ties to Russia.
Correct.
So how is that centralization justified, and what are the long-term implications for a democracy?
The justification is framed as existential necessity, ensuring unified messaging, preventing the spread of Russian propaganda, and eliminating internal political dissent that could compromise the war effort. But the long-term implication is undeniable.
Even if it's justified and temporary.
Even then, this temporary elimination of media pluralism and political competition sets a dangerous precedent for the exercise of centralized executive authority, something the post-war democracy will have to grapple with.
The cost of the war is also evident in Zelensky's uncompromising rhetoric regarding the future relationship with Russia, especially concerning war crimes.
His position is absolute on this. Following the revelation of widespread atrocities in places like Bucha, he stated unequivocally, "We will not forgive, we will not forget, we will punish everyone who committed atrocities."
He's basically said there's no going back to normal.
He has publicly asserted that Ukrainian society will not forgive Russia for this, projecting that relations will be strained for tens of years or more. The idea of a normal partnership is politically and psychologically impossible for Ukraine.
And he also expanded the definition of the damage beyond military and human losses to include environmental catastrophe.
Yes, he has actively framed the extensive environmental damage, the destruction of habitats, contamination of water sources, as more than just collateral damage. He has described it as an environmental bomb of mass destruction and formally designated the widespread destruction of ecosystems as an ecocide, which is a legally defined crime under Ukrainian law.
So he's elevating the discussion from reconstruction to holding Russia accountable for what is essentially a long-term global ecological disaster.
Exactly.
As the war dragged into 2024 and 2025, Zelensky's leadership transitioned from reactive crisis management to proactive strategic planning for endurance and, ultimately, victory.
And this included some incredibly consequential decisions regarding military personnel and mobilization policy.
Yeah, the need to constantly optimize the command structure led to highly visible personnel shifts in 2024. The most scrutinized was the dismissal of General Valery Zelenskyy.
The hugely popular commander-in-chief of the armed forces in February 2024. This was followed by the dismissal of LT Gen Yuri Sotol in June and LT Gen Mykola Oleshchuk, the Air Force commander, in August.
These were significant high-stakes shifts. What was the driving force behind removing such key commanders, even in the midst of active conflict?
The underlying driver was strategic divergence and a push for accountability. In the case of Zelenskyy, our sources indicate differing strategic views between the military and political leadership.
Specifically over what?
Specifically over mobilization rates and the required tactical shift from attritional defense to new offensive doctrines. Zelenskyy, needing to demonstrate progress and dynamism, chose to replace him with General Oleksandr Syrsky, who was expected to be more aligned with the political objectives of rapid technological modernization and aggressive defense.
And the other dismissals seem to reinforce that focus on accountability and efficiency.
Absolutely. For instance, Oleshchuk's dismissal followed the death of an F-16 pilot. And while the exact reasoning wasn't made public, Zelenskyy used the moment to emphasize the need for commanders to take care of all our warriors. These changes collectively signaled a readiness to ruthlessly optimize battlefield outcomes, even if it meant risking political controversy by removing popular figures.
And of course, sustaining the fight required controversial shifts in mobilization policy. What was his approach to addressing the severe manpower attrition?
In April 2024, he signed a new mobilization law, which lowered the draft age for compulsory service from 27 to 25. This was a critical military necessity, expanding the pool of combat-eligible men.
But our sources highlight a significant political calculation later on, in December 2024.
Yes, he resisted direct pressure from the U.S., specifically the Biden administration, to lower the conscription age further to 18.
A move that would have risked massive domestic political backlash.
Massive backlash and economic disruption. So he chose a middle path.
What did that look like?
It was a highly nuanced approach. Instead of mandatory drafting of the youngest cohort, which would draw enormous societal criticism, he introduced special military contracts for 18 to 24-year-old volunteers in February 2025.
So it provided a necessary inflow of personnel while still honoring the principle of voluntary service for the youngest citizens.
Exactly. It was a successful balancing act between military needs and domestic political stability.
Meanwhile, he needed to articulate a clear vision for how the war would actually end. In October 2024, he unveiled the comprehensive Victory Plan.
The Victory Plan was essential for both domestic and international audiences. It signaled that Ukraine had moved beyond mere survival. It articulated a 5-point holistic national strategy.
Which included what?
It had 1 geopolitical element, 2 military components, 1 economic focus, and 1 dedicated to national defense and safety. It essentially outlined Ukraine's intended path to full territorial restoration, economic revival, and integration into Western security structures.
Let's talk about the international strategy in 2024 and 2025, because this is where the diplomacy became particularly volatile.
Yes, involving key global players like China, India, and the United States under a new presidential dynamic.
He has continually tried to leverage the one country that has significant economic influence over Russia, China.
He has. In September 2025, he argued unequivocally that Beijing had the economic leverage necessary to force Putin to end the war, stating dramatically that without China, Putin's Russia is nothing.
That's a bold diplomatic strategy, trying to peel Beijing away from Moscow by appealing to China's self-interest.
It is, but he also specifically criticized China for its behavior concerning the Ukraine peace summit.
Correct. In June 2024, he directly criticized China's silence and alleged that Beijing used its diplomatic channels to actively undermine the peace summit held in Switzerland.
He accused them of dissuading other nations from attending. This public frustration with Beijing's tacit support for Moscow showed his willingness to use blunt public criticism when conventional diplomacy failed.
And that willingness to criticize was also extended to India, a crucial nation often considered non-aligned.
In July 2024, his frustration boiled over when Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi met with Putin in Moscow. This meeting happened on the very day that a devastating Russian missile strike hit a children's hospital in Kyiv.
And he publicly denounced the meeting.
Called it a huge disappointment and a devastating blow to peace efforts. He showed he would publicly censure any leader whose actions appeared to normalize or legitimize Putin's actions.
But the most traumatic diplomatic friction, and a moment that truly revealed the risks of his reliance on foreign aid, played out in the Oval Office in February 2025 with U.S. President Donald Trump.
That meeting was arguably the biggest international flashpoint of 2025. The core issue driving the friction was a proposed agreement granting the U.S. rights to extract rare minerals from Ukrainian soil.
A strategic resource leverage point.
A huge one. The discussion, which also includes Vice President J.D. Vance, rapidly escalated into a heated high-pressure exchange. The planned signing ceremony and the scheduled lunch were abruptly canceled.
And the outcome was an unprecedented humiliation for a key U.S. ally.
Yes, Zelenskyy was evicted from the White House, but the immediate, tangible consequences were even more severe. The Trump administration temporarily suspended intelligence and critical military aid for about a week.
Aid only resumed after Zelenskyy was forced to agree to a condition.
An unconditional 30-day ceasefire, contingent on Russian approval.
A condition that Russia, of course, rejected immediately.
Precisely. Russia immediately dismissed it, so the ceasefire never materialized. But the aid suspension served as a stark demonstration of the leverage the U.S. could apply. It showed Zelenskyy the fragility of his alliances.
Though it seems the sands shifted again later on.
They did. Our sources noted that after subsequent talks in June 2025, Trump was later considering sending more Patriot missile systems to Ukraine, showing just how unpredictable that relationship was.
And despite the high-stakes foreign drama, domestic stability was profoundly tested in 2025, specifically around the delicate issue of Ukraine's anti-corruption bodies.
This specific incident perfectly encapsulates the tension we've been tracking, fighting for democracy while relying on centralized wartime power. In July 2025, Zelenskyy signed a controversial law that stripped independence from two key anti-corruption institutions, NAVU and TSBO.
And for context, these bodies were established with Western backing as crucial pillars of Ukraine's reform efforts and prerequisites for EU integration.
They were essential, and the law essentially concentrated their power under the government's prosecutor general.
What was the immediate fallout?
The reaction was intense, both at home and abroad. Critics immediately warned that the move directly jeopardized Ukraine's crucial efforts toward EU integration. EU officials were quick to call it a step back.
And domestically.
Public outrage manifested in swift and massive protests across multiple cities. Civil society saw this as a direct threat to the democratic gains made since 2014.
And in a remarkable moment of political responsiveness, he rapidly reversed course.
He did, demonstrating that public opinion and civil society remain robust, even under martial law. Due to the undeniable strength of the public backlash, he quickly submitted and signed a new bill restoring the full independence of NABU and SPO just 9 days later.
He issued a statement saying it was very important that the state listens to public opinion.
It's proof that there are limits to centralized wartime authority, and that Ukrainian democratic norms, at least the demand for accountability, remain powerful corrective mechanisms.
Finally, looking at the long-term projection for Ukraine's post-war future, Zelenskyy has addressed his own role.
He has. And he's been definitive about his future intentions. In September 2025, he publicly stated that he will not seek a second term once the war concludes and a fully functioning peacetime democracy can be restored.
So he's positioning himself as a transitional wartime leader.
Exactly. Dedicated to achieving military victory, securing the necessary security guarantees, and then handing the reins over to the next democratically elected government.
So if we synthesize this deep dive, the story of Volodymyr Zelenskyy is the ultimate paradox. We've tracked his permanent shift from a globally successful, commercially savvy, comedic performer who navigated complex domestic issues, including his own offshore controversies revealed by the Pandora Papers,
Right.
to a globally recognized war strategist, leveraging information technology and relentless diplomacy.
His leadership today is defined by a necessary, yet potentially perilous complexity. It's an intense, tech-forward strategy focused on rapid, asymmetric military technology deployment, coupled with meticulous mobilization planning, all while engaging in these high-stakes international negotiations.
Negotiations that sometimes mean publicly challenging essential, powerful allies like China and dealing with the profound unpredictability of figures like Donald Trump.
Exactly.
What stands out to me most is his mastery of the digital information front. He used modern communication technology, from Instagram to tailored addresses, to sustain a war effort, unite a nation, and secure vital international aid.
I agree, but we have to return to that essential tension. The tightrope walk between the necessary centralization of executive wartime control, the media consolidation, the suspension of political parties, that initial momentary attempt to weaken anti-corruption bodies.
And his stated long-term goal of establishing a transparent, corruption-free democracy that is responsive to the people.
Yes, and that swift reversal on the Nebuchadnezzar law is strong evidence that Ukrainian public pressure still imposes significant constraints on executive power, even during martial law.
So here's the provocative thought for you, the learner, to consider after this deep dive. Given the critical life-saving role that speed, cutting-edge technology, and centralized military decision-making must play in modern conflict, how might this prolonged period of martial law and highly centralized wartime authority fundamentally reshape the political culture and democratic institutions Zelenskyy is fighting to preserve?
The question isn't about his stated intentions, but how the necessary methods of victory might, perhaps inevitably, redefine the post-war democracy itself. That relationship between wartime control and enduring democratic norms is a question that will define Ukraine's future long after the last shot is fired.